Well, it's Thursday, noontime, Biz News webinar. Numbers climbing up to beyond 500, so I'm very pleased that we did manage to expand our capacity. My colleague Stuart Lohman is just going to make sure, before we introduce you to everybody on the screen, he's just going to make sure that all the tech is working. Stuart.
Excellent, thanks Alec, and welcome all. Just quickly, if you can see five pretty faces on your screen and hear my voice, there's a little high five button that all the attendees can push. If you click that, I know the video is coming through and you can hear the audio clearly. Okay, excellent, that's working well. And as those who are new to our webinars, we do like to keep them conversational. So there's a little questions drop-down menu on the right-hand control panel. If you put your questions in there, Alec or myself can push them through to the guests on hand. But Alec, back to you.
Thanks, Stu. A little bit of an exaggeration with your introduction for 5 pretty faces. I'm not sure that I qualify, but of course Paul's very much in there. Paul O'Sullivan, you can see him on your screen, looking very dapper as ever. Off to another meeting.
I feel like a rose between 2 thorns, but anyway.
And Sarah Jane Trent, who keeps Paul in order, I think, from time to time, perhaps, possibly. It's an impossible job, but we're going to be chatting, Sarah Jane, about what you guys are up to and how the state investigations are going.
Great.
And before we get there, though, we've got a very special guest in Rachel Kolisi, who my colleague, Linda van Tilburg, is going to introduce us to. They'll have a chat for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll get into answering all those questions that the business community have for the Forensics for Justice team. So we're still here. Our cameras are going to be off, but it's over to you, Linda.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks so much for joining us, and we were hoping that Sia might also pop in. You are, of course, of the Khaleesi Foundation, and I just want to tell everybody it's a foundation that you two started to, well, I think first of all, you started off to help kids with rugby kit, and it seems to have blossomed now to help in the coronavirus period. So can you tell us all about the Khaleesi Foundation?
Yes, of course. So actually, the foundation was not due to launch for another few more months. But of course, with the COVID-19 situation, we really wanted to help with that and assist wherever we could. So we had been doing projects previously. You know, Sia's been working on a collaboration to build a rugby field in one of the townships in Cape Town. We had dreams of kind of tournaments and just kind of impacting children at youth level and making sure that you know, there's equal playing fields all through South Africa. I had been doing a number of community projects in and around Cape Town and Port Elizabeth as well, but we weren't officially ready to launch the foundation. We're still working on a website even, you know, we've got a landing page up and running, but yeah, just we wanted to help where we could with the COVID-19 situation. So we were able to assist 3 different hospitals with PPE, protective gear for the frontline workers. And then we're advised by the private sector to move away from the PPE and focus more on the feeding in South Africa, because that's one of the biggest issues at the moment, is trying to keep people home. And obviously people can't do that if they're unemployed and not able to get food. So to make sure that people are fed at home.
And I've seen you've been to some townships. Can you give us sort of a feeling of what is happening on the ground? Is there real hunger out there?
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely extreme. We did our first drop in Port Elizabeth, in Zwede, in Port Elizabeth, where Sia grew up, actually the township that Sia grew up in. And then we went over to Limpopo, where we did a drop off there. Also, the water situation in Limpopo is horrendous, so we actually dropped a borehole in Limpopo as well. We have done a second drop in Port Elizabeth. We've done numerous amounts of drops in Cape Town as well. The ones I think that have been heaviest for me are kind of the Mitchells Plain, Manenberg, Tafelsig kind of areas in Cape Town. There's just a lot of kids that are like running around there, you know, without protection at all. A lot of people not really, I think, understanding the severity of the situation. So it's just been really great that we've been able to go out. And of course, Sia is one of the most influential people in South Africa at the moment. And I'm really to kind of, I think for people in those communities to hear it come from his mouth, that it's super important that they stay home. They've got a mask on, you know, they keep sanitizing, washing hands. They actually take it seriously. You know, when we went back to PE for the second drop, it was extraordinary to see how many people we provide masks in all of the food packs that we deliver. And it's extraordinary to see how many of them are actually wearing the masks, you know, when we went back. So that's really great. And also with the food drops that we're doing, we've committed for 3 months. So none of the drops that we do are a once-off. So it's for 3 months to kind of hopefully get these people through at least this COVID-19 situation.
You mentioned that Sia said he's almost been there. So can you tell us a bit of, you know, we've read about it, but you know, you've personally spoken to him about it. Has he ever experienced hunger as a kid or when in his teens?
You know, actually, when we went back for the second drop in Port Elizabeth, one of the first houses that we did a drop off was very close to where he lived, and some of the ladies actually just burst into tears, and they said, you know, when you were a child, you used to come with a little plastic cup to our home, asking for samp or beans or whatever he could get to kind of to fill his family's tummies basically for the night. So so he used to run around with his empty cup in Sweden. It was just extraordinary to hear those women saying, it's amazing that now you return to us with food for a month, you know,
so
for our family. So,
how much do you need to feed a family for a month? Sorry, Rachel, you broke up there. How much money do you need?
And so we're working on about 100 Rand per person. Sorry, we are working on about 100 Rand per person per month. So for a family of 6, it's 600 Rand a month. That's kind of the budget that we're working on at the moment.
Sure, it's unbelievable that you can feed people like that. And has he been roping in other sportsmen to help him?
Yeah, there's been so many of his teammates that have been asking about it and seeing how they can kind of get involved and wanting to start foundations and stuff as well, which is super amazing. So there are a number of them. I know that Eben Etzebeth did a drop. Wade Fanika joined us in Bloemfontein just this last weekend. Sia's out with Cheslin Colby this morning actually doing a drop in the Cape Town area. So there's a lot of other sportsmen that are getting involved. A lot. I know Jesse Creel's doing a lot in Durban as well. Just a lot of Sia's teammates and kind of contacts are wanting to get involved as much as possible. So we're just trying to support them, you know, if they see a vision. Also Faf du Plessis, we did a drop with him in Cape Town. But you know, a lot of their players just, they have their own vision, they have their own project, and we don't want it to all be a Kolisi show, you know, so we just want to assist if we can to make their projects happen. But by no means are we looking for any credit from the projects that they are pushing.
Well, today we have the audience the business community. What would you like to ask the business community?
I mean, it's a nice community to chat to when you're running a foundation. But
you don't always have them as such a captive audience. So, in other words, do you want people to go to your site and donate? What would you like? Because you're already partnering, I think, with Old Mutual.
We're not officially partnered with Old Mutual. So one of the campaigns that we're working on is the Each One Feed One campaign with the Bumba Foundation, who are partnered with Old Mutual, and the Nelson Mandela Foundation. But I think at this point, you know, finances are the biggest thing. There's a big project that we're going to be rolling out in the next week. We'll be traveling back to Port Elizabeth to roll out a model for schools, which we will give more information on further. But basically, one school is going to adopt another school. So a Model C school is going to adopt a disadvantaged school. But the shortfall that comes from the Model C schools, we're going to have to, as a foundation, pick up. And that's going to be a massive project. And obviously the finances there are going to be extreme. So obviously that would be hugely helpful. And you can check out more information at www.kolisifoundation.org. There's been a lot of information posted. You know, we're very active on social media as well. And yeah, there's so much more that we're stepping into as a foundation, and so much more that we want to do. But obviously top priority at the moment is making sure that people are fed during this time.
Rachel, Khaleesi, thank you very much for joining us. Linda van Tilburg's over in London as well. We appreciate the insights into what you guys are doing and more strength to your efforts. So thank you for coming through, and look forward to the next time. Well, if you have just joined us, we've had a special guest in Rachel Khaleesi, but I know that there were lots of people hanging or waiting for Paul O'Sullivan and Sarah Jane Trent, both of whom are joining us now. Paul, let's just see if we can get him on screen. There we go. And Sarah Jane as well. Stuart, just to go through quickly, if you don't mind, a little bit of background on how we pose questions, etc. I know there have been some questions. There's a lot of questions coming through already, but if people joined us a little late, they can give us some insights.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, just on the control panel on the right-hand side, there's a little drop-down questions, drop-down menu there. Just plot them in there and we can pass them on, Alex. As you know, we do like to keep it very conversational, and the conversation usually drives the actual conversation itself. So all over to you, Alex.
Now, Paul, I have put up on the screen your CV, which I asked you for a CV, and you sent me something that was it came through blank on my side. But I think there's a list of names that most people who are in this webinar will know. Jackie Selebi, Khomotso Patlani, both of those top cops, both generals. Dudu Myeni, who I see you haven't given up on. Radovan Krajcek, Antonio Trinidadi. I wanted to put the Guptas there as well. Have you guys had much sword crossing with them?
Not so much sword crossing. I think we went to visit one of their properties after they packed their bags and left, and I managed to go around the property and take some photographs of the shell that was left there. And then one of the security guys came over and said, "Who are you?" And I said, "No, I'm just having a look." But that's the only real sort of doings we had with him. What we did do, though, we attacked quite heavily other characters related to state capture, such as Lucky Montana. You mentioned Dudu Myeni, but the other angle to Dudu Myeni, of course, was Jacob Zuma. And I think we opened a docket in 2018. Sarah Jane drafted that docket, and that was relating to the corruption of Jacob Zuma, Dudu Myeni, her son, which is also Jacob Zuma's son, Talenti Myeni, and their advisor, a guy called Nick Linnell, who saw fit to assist Jacob Zuma in hijacking Eskom. And as we know, the people that were at that stage involved at Transnet, they moved across, having completed their work at Transnet and Prasa, they moved across and hijacked Eskom. And that was Brian Malefi and the chief finance officer. And that whole thing was arranged, and Zuma was present when it was arranged. And we're quite satisfied that they have a case to answer for that.
I've got to ask you a question that my brother-in-law, who just got back from Australia, shame, what a trip they had. They went to Australia to see family, then couldn't get back on a plane, finally managed to get one, arrived in South Africa, put into quarantine for 2 weeks, and we did manage to see them on their way back to Pietermaritzburg, where they live. He said he wants to buy shares in Edward Zuma's company. Now, I remember one memorable evening, and we did carry the audio from Power FM, where you were being interviewed by Power FM, and Edward Zuma was on that as well. And you were talking about his illicit tobacco or cigarette trade.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the conspiracy theorists are saying Edward Zuma's, I don't know if he's related to Nkosazana, but obviously he's related. I don't know if he's directly related, though. It seems rather strange that in a lockdown, no cigarettes can be sold, and yet you've got a member of the family who apparently has made gazillions out of, well, illegal cigarettes, or such are the allegations. Can he buy shares in Edward Zuma's company?
Well, first of all, you know, the first thing you should tell your family member is that a fool and his money are soon parted. The thing about Edward Zuma, there is no blood relationship between him and the lady you just mentioned. I battle pronunciation of her name, but the relationship with him, his father is Jacob Zuma. His mother was a 15-year-old girl living in Swaziland. So Edward Zuma, as you probably know, is the first of the Zuma children, well, the first documented of the Zuma children. And he was born when his father was in exile in Swaziland, and the child was taken away from the mother because she was only 15 when the child was born. So the child was taken away from the mother and then brought into the family and actually brought up by Nkosana Dlamini Zuma. There you are, I got it. So that's the kind of relationship, but we should be more interested in his business relationships, because he hangs around with some fairly nefarious characters, as do most of the other well-known Zuma family members. And in this particular case, he hangs around with people, and was in fact directors with them, of companies that were engaged in manufacturing, production and sale of counterfeit cigarettes, and what we call below the table cigarettes that were manufactured at night time during a night shift and no duty paid on them. And there have been some fairly strong admissions in that respect. In fact, we have all the sworn statements, which makes it quite clear that the company, I think it was called ATM, a strange name, but anyway, some Amalgamated Tobacco Manufacturers, and this company had directors that didn't exist, and we were able to prove that. So the names of the directors were Pakistani, but when we drilled down and tried to get those people, we found that they actually didn't exist. And I think that's why the real shadow owners of the company were arrested and charged. And Edward Zuma was dragged in on that little tea party. And of course, the relationship goes a lot deeper than that, because Lieutenant General Munu, who at the time was the head of the detectives in South Africa, he was involved quite nicely with a chap by the name of Yusuf Kaji, who was Edward Zuma's business partner. And in fact, we have it on very good authority that Yusuf Kaji sponsored Munu and his wife on a trip to India. They bought their original tickets themselves, but he upgraded them to business class and gave them a 2-day stopover in Dubai on the way, paid for out of his own pocket. So the corruption within the Zuma family and the links from the Zuma family go quite deep. And as a result of all that, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, but the amount of money that's been stolen from the fiscus in South Africa, which is hard-earned money of taxpayers, which could have been used. I mean, there are various estimates. Some estimate 100 billion, others estimate 500 billion. We're saying it's somewhere in the region of 500 billion that's been swiped and purloined from the various state-owned enterprises or state-owned companies. And that money could have equally well been used to uplift the poor in South Africa. And now we're left with this terrific, terrible situation where people like ourselves, for example, we have to scratch around and see what money we've got so that we can buy food to feed people living in informal settlements near to where we live. And I think that it's not our function. We've done it because if we didn't, they would starve to death. But it's a function of government. But government have been stripped of all the cash that they should have had for uplifting the poor in our country.
We got so many questions, and we've also got your colleague and long-time number 2, Sarah Jane Trent, with us. Sarah Jane, thanks for being so patient and not chipping in when Paul was talking there. Must be a bit difficult working together with such a famous guy who does like to talk a little.
I've switched off her mic.
I think she switched off her own mic. Sarah Jane, do you want to just unmute yourself? There we go.
Oh,
you're back.
Hi. Oh, good. Oh no, I prefer he does the talking.
And you're an attorney, so do you have to check up on him and make sure that he doesn't say scurrilous things like he has?
Of course. No, I'm joking. I hold his jacket while he types his furious email, which is quite entertaining.
Well, yeah, many of which, do you actually read those emails before they go, or?
No, I get them at the same time everyone else.
Okay, so we know how it works.
And then we chat about them afterwards.
Well, then we even know more how it works. But we've got a lot of questions from members of the business community, and that was really the purpose of asking you to come onto this webinar. The first one comes from Donald Grant. He says, a question for Paul and or Sarah. Justice delayed is justice denied. What needs to happen to restore justice via the legal system, to restore accountability? How many prosecutable cases are there at the NPA and PPA levels in the provinces? How long will it take to eliminate the backlog and get the necessary convictions? Finally, how many more correctional services centers are needed to be built, and where will the budget come from? So a very all-embracing question on what you guys do day to day. Paul?
Well, I've heard that they've recently created capacity in the prisons by booting a few thousand out. Whether or not that capacity will be put to good use is another story. I'm of the firm opinion that the criminal justice system is still captured. I've been saying it's been captured for the last almost 10 years now, and it's still captured. We might have new leaders. For example, there's a new head of, well, I say new, in the last couple of years, we have appointed a new head of the DPCI, which is the Hawks, and we have a new national director of public prosecutions, although probably not new anymore because they've all been in post now, I think, about 2 years. The problem is, I don't believe that there's the willpower below those levels. Now, you can't expect General Labia to go out and do the investigations and for the head of the prosecution service to prosecute those cases. They have to rely on people below them. But the people below them are all, not all of them, but a few of them are captured. And they're doing what they can to drag their feet. We made it clear in the middle of last year that the only way to deal with these cases is to go for the low-hanging fruit. Now, I learned the lesson hard a long time ago that if you charge somebody with 1,500 offences, the trial will last years, the judge will lose track of what's going on, and eventually the guy will be convicted and he might get 10 or 15 years. On the same front, if you charge a person with 1 or 2 offences, he may also get 10 or 15 years. So what they need to do is select the crisp, clean offences that have been committed and charge them simply on that and run that case through court. There'll be less than a week or 2 weeks in court. They'll get their conviction and the people are put away. They might only get 5 or 10 years instead of 15 or 20 years, but the interest of justice will be served. And we're saying that's what they should be doing. They should go for the low-hanging fruit. There are cases that we registered as far back as 2015. That's 5 years ago. Lucky Montana, for example, crystal clear case of corruption in his case. And his attorney, him and his attorney should have been arrested and charged with corruption and money laundering, which is, if you add the two together, it amounts to racketeering. And they only had to select 2 or 3 of the offences and charge them. They haven't done it. Those people still haven't been charged.
Will Jacob Zuma ever be prosecuted, asks Henk Nell, or is he being protected by the ANC?
Well, there's no doubt that over the years he's been protected by the ANC, and the proof of that is the cases that were taken to the Constitutional Court, where it was found by the then public protector that the Parliament oversight of the executive had failed, and that Parliament had allowed Jacob Zuma to do things that he shouldn't have been doing. Now, Parliament obviously is the ANC, because the minority parties in Parliament weren't able to vote a vote of no confidence in Zuma. They didn't have enough votes. So you end up with a situation where Parliament voted that it had confidence in Zuma. Now, that makes them joint and severally liable for everything that Jacob Zuma did, and they need to be held accountable.
We've had an answer to this already, I think, from Gareth Druce, who says, how is Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma connected to the tobacco black market? You don't want to be any more specific on that one, or you don't want him to be, Sarah Jane?
I think also to mention Mazzotti, who I think gave a lot to her election campaign.
Carry on.
And he admitted doing that, he sponsored, I think they bought T-shirts and stuff, didn't they? So, as you know, there was an internal election within the ANC and you had Cyril Ramaphosa, and you had her running for presidency of the ANC. And there's all sorts of trauma about where the money came from to pay for their campaigning. As we know, Bosasa were flagged for donating 500,000 Rand to the Cyril Ramaphosa campaign. That money has been taken and stuck into a lawyer's trust account pending the outcome of the criminal investigations against Bosasa and the now deceased Watson family member. But in the case of Dlamini Zuma, it's clear that she received sponsorship from people that were involved in the tobacco trade, the illicit tobacco trade. And that's questionable. You know, she shouldn't be involved in making any decisions when it comes to things like tobacco. And unfortunately, she has been making decisions. It goes without saying, although I'm not saying it's intentional, but the beneficiaries of the decisions not to allow tobacco to be sold or tobacco products to be sold, the beneficiaries of that are the underworld tobacco barons. And I think they've been laughing all the way to the bank.
Definitely.
We got Johan van Lokrenberg on the in the audience, and actually, Johan, you did put a question there, but it didn't come through. So if you wouldn't mind doing that again, I'm sure that both Paul and Sarah Jane would be interested to see it. Sarah Jane, apologies, I jumped in.
Oh, I also think that you know, Dlamini Zuma has a personal gripe with BAT as well. I think it was in 2000 or 2001 when she banned the advertising of cigarettes in South Africa, and they went to court and she won. There was, you know, the huge fight and whatnot. Actually, on Twitter, she put something on the other day saying, you know, bragging and whatnot. And I think there's also, you know, it's just, it's not separate from sort of her emotional and ego, so to speak, which is.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. She's emotionally attached to the anti-cigarette lobby in that regard. So the problem is the decisions made by government and this so-called COVID committee, it has to be rational. And nobody can explain the rationality, for example, of banning cigarettes and alcohol. Of course, there can always be a side argument that, oh, well, if people aren't smoking, they won't die of cancer, and therefore the hospital beds will be free. And if they're not drinking, they won't be involved in punch-ups, and therefore the hospital beds will be free. But if one looks at the damage to the economy of having people robbing shops and having this underground economy going through, the amount of money lost to the fiscus in the same period must be horrendous. And then you also need to consider, if we applied the same rationality for banning tobacco and alcohol, then we might as well make everybody hand in their car keys as well, because guess what? Motor vehicle accidents take place, and that also takes up hospital beds. In fact, there's more people in South Africa die every year from motor vehicle accidents than most other unnatural causes. Now, globally, it's 1.5 million people die a year from motor vehicle accidents. So if you apply the same mentality to COVID-19 and you applied it to motor vehicle accidents, the roads would all be closed and people wouldn't be allowed to drive. So we've got to get around to the reality of the fact that COVID-19 is not a 5-minute flash in the pan. It's going to be around for several years. And what we need to do is learn to live with it, learn to exercise caution, and to live responsibly, but not shut down the economy in order to save 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 lives. Of course, every life lost is tragic, but it's no good saving 3,000 lives if you're going to put 3 million people unemployed, and they end up what? They can't pay their bills, they can't buy food, they die of starvation, or some of them will be so tragic they will take their own lives. So we're going to see a massive social fallout from the steps that have been taken. We need to get a balancing act. And if I listened, which I did, to Cyril Ramaphosa last night, it seems they recognize that they've made 1 or 2 mistakes, and they're now going to try and do a balancing act. They're going to tweak the level 4 measures, and level 3 is 2 weeks away now by the sound of things. So we'll probably see a further relaxation. But we need to get on with the fact that life must go on, and COVID will be around for several years.
I'll put that question, or the question of some of the irrationality, i.e. you can't buy flip-flops, or you can't buy short-sleeved shirts, or you can't buy cigarettes, to our only living Nobel Prize winner who I interviewed yesterday. And unfortunately, the interview was for an hour and I had to cut it out. But in there, I said to him, why would the government do that? And he said, well, it's a regime that shows its power. And it's not just in South Africa, it's in many parts of the world where they like to show you who's boss, and they can. So they've done these things. I thought that was a very rational response to some very irrational decisions. We got lots of questions though. Alvain Barnes wants to know, could you discuss your gripes with Pravin Gordhan?
I don't have any gripes with Pravin Gordhan. I just want to make it clear that I sat in, I think it was in 2016, in July, in fact, 2016. I sat in a presentation he was doing at EY in Johannesburg, a breakfast presentation. And I asked him a very simple question. I said to him, when are you going to fire Dudu Myeni and clean up South African Airways? And he gave me a drop-dead look. He wasn't satisfied, he wasn't happy with the question, and he tried to avoid the answer. Now, he kept her on for further 16 months to finish the job of wrecking South African Airways. And then the next most noticeable thing was during the earlier part of 2019, he went, I think it was February 2019, he went to the Zondo Commission and he gave a whole big story about how he could see all this damage going on, and this, you know, if one looks at the evidence he gave, it was clear that there was corruption taking place in front of his very eyes. And that begs the question, why didn't he go and open a docket 4 years ago when he could see, or 5 years ago, when he could see what was going on? If these cabinet members had stepped forward and opened dockets about what they could see going on, instead of waiting for the Zondo Commission to come along, things might have been a bit easier. And certainly in respect of South African Airways, he knew what was going on. And he should have opened the docket back in 2016. We opened the docket in 2016, and we stood alone in that. And actually, we opened the docket, I think, in 2015. And we opened a second docket in January 2016, and I got yanked off a plane 2 months later. So, you know, one has to wonder why these people, now that Zuma's gone, they feel comfortable with going along to the Zondo Commission and telling the way it was. But they've ignored their legal obligations in terms of Section 35 of Act 12 of 2004, which requires a person in a position of authority to report to the authorities if he's aware of any corruption. And it's clear from the evidence he gave at the Zondo Commission that he was aware of the corruption, but he sat quiet for 3 years or 4 years.
It's so interesting. I had a similar situation where somebody that we had an association with in business bribed someone at South African Airways. They literally bribed them to get books onto the aircraft. And at the time, I was told that the only thing I could do was report it at a police station, which I duly did. I even wrote to, I went to see the people at South African Airways, and you can imagine how successful that was. But after reporting at the police station, I heard nothing. Parkview police station, never phoned, never engaged. It was just, and it was an American citizen, which meant he would have gone to jail there as well. But I guess that's just the way things roll in this country sometimes. And I presume that the politicians felt the same way.
Well, unfortunately, it's not just a case of the politicians feeling the same way. They must check what the legislation says. They had a legal obligation. It wasn't, in your case, you probably didn't have a legal obligation. The politicians who could see what was going on in front of them, they had a legal obligation. Look at this other fellow that came along. I forget his name now. He was I think he was also finance minister at one stage, or the person that was offered the job as finance minister. And he came along and he waxed lyrical in 2019 about how in 2015 he was invited to a meeting in the Saxonwold Shebeen and told, there's a bag of money, you can take it with you. He did nothing about it. He waited until the Zondo Commission. He broke the law. And sadly, none of the evidence leaders said to these people, but why didn't you open a criminal docket? If he would have gone and opened the criminal docket back in late 2015, I think it was December 2015, when the then finance minister was fired, and this guy was supposed to get the job. But they then, when he wouldn't take the bag of money and leave the Saxon Wall Shebeen, he was then replaced with another fellow. But if he would have instead gone to the police station and prepared a sworn statement and opened a docket, of course, nothing would have come of it, because by then the police and the Hawks were well and truly captured, but it would have documented the reality of the situation instead of waiting 5 years to go and tell the story at the Zondo Commission.
There's a question here from Benjamin Pretorius. He says, are you aware of Operation Chariot driven by government? Either of you?
No.
No? Sorry, Benjamin, that's outside of our remit there. To Paul, you called out Pravin Gordhan correctly on his liability in the SAA debacle. What about his continued cadre deployment in the appointment of Sisekeli Mzimela to Transnet after screwing SA Express and particularly its employees, who without communication found themselves unpaid and worse? And then it goes on and on and on. I would just, well, let's hear what you guys have to say, and that's from John Pearson.
Well, again, you know, earlier we spoke about the inability of the state to prosecute any of these people, and I said we must go for the low-hanging fruit. So what you are looking at on your screen now is Forensics for Justice. It's me and Sarah Jane Trent. There is nobody else. That's it. So if we were to go after everybody for everything they did, we'd spread ourselves very thinly. So what we do along the way is we go for small little areas where there's crystal clear evidence of wrongdoing, and we raise those issues and we try and drive that forward. If you look at the investigation, for example, we did on Lucky Montana, that took 8 months of work. The docket was opened in September 2015. The docket, which I think is 3 lever arch files, contains enough evidence to prosecute Lucky Montana, his attorney, and a guy called Mario Ferreira, who's the CEO of a company called Siangena Technologies. There's enough evidence in that docket to prosecute all 3 of them instantly, without going with any more evidence. And they could each be prosecuted for half a dozen charges each, and it would be finished and done with. Here we are 5 years later, not a single one of them has been charged, and no attempts have been made to get back the 4 billion rand that was stolen from Prasa.
Rod Suter says, hi Paul, I have the greatest admiration for your efforts, but wonder how you are financed. It is manifestly not cheap. Are you able to share this info? Keep up the good work.
Well, as some people that know me know that my main activity is property development. So in South Africa, over the last 30 years, I've developed 1,500 residential units and probably a couple of small retail malls. I also do property development overseas. So I'm a shareholder of a public company, a property company based in London. And at this point in time, we are the largest investor on the island of St. Helena. If you look at the pictures behind me, that's Jacob's Ladder at Jamestown, and that's the heart-shaped waterfall, as they call it, which is just above Jamestown. And I'm quite busy in development on the island of St. Helena. In addition to that, I run a forensic company called Paul O'Sullivan Associates, and all our profits from Paul O'Sullivan Associates, which used to be quite a few million rand a year, it went down after I got arrested, but it started going up again. All of our profits from that are used to finance Forensics for Justice. And if I tell you at the moment, I think we've got 2,500 rand in the bank of Forensics for Justice. So every time an account comes in, I end up paying it myself. I pay Sarah Jane's fees, and you know, she's not cheap. So at the end of the day, I think in the last 5 years, I've probably put in excess of 10 million rand of my own money into Forensics for Justice. I think in the same period, we probably had about 300,000 rand in donations. So it gives you an idea. So if there are any business people watching now and they want to do something positive in the field of anti-corruption, just go to forensicsforjustice.org, and there is a donate button there, because the more money we have, I can buy more resources and make more. If you look at what we've done on our website with the meager resources we have, you'll be quite shocked at how we've managed to pull it off.
Also, we want to do private prosecutions on some of these cases. We're ready to go, ready to run.
Good point, Sarah Jane. Some of these cases that we have lodged are ripe for prosecution. The National Prosecuting Authority have not got off their butt and arrested and charged any of these people. And what we're saying is, we would like to be able to put them on terms, case by case, and say, well, there you are. That case was opened 5 years ago. It's prosecutable. Give us the certificate that you don't intend to prosecute, and we'll prosecute it ourselves. Now, to prosecute a case, for example, like Lucky Montana, you have to pay a deposit as well. You'll probably be looking at about 3 or 4 million rand to prosecute Lucky Montana and Mario Ferreira and their attorney, but they need to be prosecuted, and the state has clearly failed in that regard. Now, I know that AfriForum do have a private prosecution unit as well. We have worked on 1 or 2 of the cases that they've been involved in, but we really need to get some good funding going so that we can send out a clear signal that if you commit corruption, you're stealing the future of the country and you're going to spend your future in prison.
Well, I will commit that, and we had about 640 people I see on the webinar at the moment, and we had about 1,000 people who registered, and I'll commit that we will send them those details. So if there's anybody there who wants to make a contribution to Forensics for Justice, I know last time, as you say, you got 300,000 rands in donations. I think the business community.
A lot of it was from BizNews.
So
I hasten to add, Alec, that all the donations that we got was a result of 2 or 3 years ago, you pushing us on BizNews and asking for donations. And then a few people have signed up where they pay, they've put in stop orders for 200 rand a month. Now, I think we had 3 of those or 4 of those, and I'm not poo-pooing the 200 rand a month. If that's what you can afford, great. But if we're going to make a dent and put some of these bigwigs behind bars, because that's what needs to happen. We need to be, instead of doing what the NPA are doing, which is a shotgun approach, a blunderbuss approach, we'd like to do a sniper's rifle approach, single 1 or 2 out and nail their hides to the wall and send them to prison.
Well, as I said, I'm going to commit to send out those details to everybody who's on this webinar or registered to come onto it. Johan van Lochrenberg. Now, there's a little bit of background. He was head of the investigations unit at SARS. He was one of the people who got ejected there with all the corruption that went on at the time with Tom Moyani and so on. You can read about his story in a book that he co-wrote with Adrian Laquet, and he sent a message. Johan said, and it's a little quite long, but it's worth reading. It is rather apparent that the criminal justice systems, SAPS, DPCI, NPA, and subunits in the NPA, SIU, and so on, SARS, and other departments that enforce law have been completely broken under state capture. What we have seen since are the departure of Ntsameza, Abrahams, and Moyani. We forgot about Sean the Sheep. You didn't even mention him. He was also one of your people that you didn't like too much. Same goes.
Fresh air that guy was, you know. And sadly, he's now working for a corrupt regime that's running Botswana.
Same goes for the State Security Agency, Fraser. But in essence, these state organs remain completely incapacitated. They are completely snowed under. A lot of this is now attributed to many of the current leadership without reflection of the lag of state capture. How can these dynamics be best addressed? And are Lebeya, Batoy, Kisveta, and people at SSA open to solutions? And do they have a plan? And if so, what is that plan? Now, you tap into these guys.
Well, I know all of them. Okay, I've known Godfrey for 20 years. I first met Shamila Batohi on a plane back from Cape Town. I think it was either last year or the year before, after the state opening of Parliament. I've known Ed Kieswetter for a very long time. And in fact, you know, we've often had supper together. So at the end of the day, what you have to remember is they're captains of ships, and it's the people below them that they battle with. They don't have the law, you know, the lawful ability, although I think they've started making some changes. The process to kick out or get rid of a director of public prosecutions is not an overnight job. And in my opinion, they'd be better off practicing what I call checkbook redundancies. They should call people in. It'll be cheaper in the long run. Call them in, tell them, listen, you've done your time. We need to get rid of you. Off you go. There's your money. We don't want to see you again. And then we can get fresh blood in, blood that is not afraid to prosecute people, because we have this problem at the moment that they don't want to touch any of these cases, and we can't understand why. And I mean, I've known Johan Lochrenberg for many, many years. We go back to the Celebi days. Radovan Krejcir, Johan worked a lot on Radovan Krejcir. In fact, I gave up with the police and the Hawks, and I went to SARS and said, look at what I've got. And they were able to pull him down. And only then the police picked it up again and went after him. But in the early days, I had prosecutable cases. The police didn't act. We now know why, because Krejcir had them in his pocket. So I went to Johan. I said, look at what I've got on these people. He worked on it for a year. He put a whole team on it, and they took Radovan Krejcir to pieces. They neutralized him financially, and that left him vulnerable. And then the state came along and finished the job off. But I mean, what they need to do, they need to, as I said earlier, they need to go after the low-hanging fruit. It's there. It's ripe for picking.
Michael Clark says, may I first say, Paul and Sarah Jane, you guys are a beacon of hope. But having said that, no progress on VBS or Prasa or Gupta's, Molefi, and so on. Can we really expect anything to ever happen if the ANC control the police through the police minister, and they're not going to lock themselves up?
No, I mean, first of all, we didn't investigate VBS. If you go to our website, you can see the cases that we have worked on. And as I said, it's that you're looking at us. There's the two of us. So it's, in my case, it's all my spare time, and I work 7 days a week, probably 10 to 15 hours a day. So I put a lot of time into it. Sarah Jane also puts a lot of time. We worked, I think, 2 days non-stop one day. We worked right through the night and the whole of the next day and the following night. So we've put a lot of energy into these cases, and it saddens us to see that they're not being taken forward. And anybody can go onto our website and look at the cases. And it's not rocket science. If you read the evidence that's there, the evidence that we've adduced, it becomes immediately apparent that the people are as guilty as a puppy sitting next to a pile of steaming poo. And all that has to happen is there needs to be a decision to charge these people with 2 or 3 offences. That's all. We look at Trindade, for example. We've got all of his bank statements. We've got a witness who's parked right here in London. I'm in London at the moment. I came up a couple of weeks ago. We've got a witness here, and we've got all of his bank statements. He's handed his bank statements over. And those bank statements show quite clearly who got paid what. Now, of course, all those bank statements are in the hand of the NPA. But we opened a docket, I think it's over a year ago. Yes, it's over a year ago. And then eventually we had to start threatening the National Prosecuting Authority by asking, well, are you going to prosecute him or not? Or can we do a private prosecution? Because we were satisfied the evidence was clear enough. And while all this is going on, I've got Trindade and his dirty lawyers chasing me down, dragging me off to court. They do it all the time. These criminals drag me off to court. Don't forget, Radovan Krejcir took me to court 4 times. I mean, it's crazy. And you've got lawyers that are prepared to take money from these criminals to chase me into court and bring these nefarious applications accusing me of harassment. Well, I do harass them, and I make no apologies for it. I'll harass any criminal that's trying to steal our country. I won't allow it.
A follow-up question, I guess, from Leslie Salo, who says, will Shamila Batoy stay the course or resign at a critical point?
Well, I'd really like to reserve judgment on that. Staying the course that they're currently on, for me, isn't going to work. She's been in office 2 years now. 2 years goes very quickly, To put things into perspective, they built the Jubilee Line extension in London in 2 years. I think Gautrain took 3 years to build. And in 2 years, I don't know why we haven't had a big head being arrested and charged and prosecuted. Certainly the dockets that we've opened, there's rampant amounts of incontrovertible evidence, factual evidence that definitely shows corruption, and you could prosecute them and get them put in jail. And I think Shamila, I wish her well, but staying the course that we're currently on isn't going to work. What we need is a few short, sharp shocks to the system. We need people to be put behind bars. And sometimes, if one looks at, although they're wasted cases, AfriForum applied for a certificate in respect of Duduzani and his driving issues. He had a reckless driving case, and AfriForum wanted to go after him. And when they applied for the certificate, the state then took a decision to prosecute him. Now, what we don't want to do is apply for a certificate and get it, and not have the money in our bank to be able to prosecute these people. So we want to build up a war chest, apply for one certificate against one of these criminals that we've identified. The state then either has to make a decision to prosecute or hand us a certificate, and we'll do it. Now, the act of applying for the certificate may trigger them to decide to arrest and charge. And when we apply for the certificate, we'll actually give them a specimen charge sheet. In fact, if you look at the dockets that we put on our website, most of them have specimen charge sheets there. So we've even gone to the length of setting out what the charges should be.
Also, that's exactly what happened. Sorry. That's exactly what happened with Trindade. It was just dragging and dragging. We knew that they were doing the investigation. It's not a difficult case. Paul then emailed, said, listen, if you're not going to prosecute, we'll prosecute. And the next week, they were arrested just in time for Christmas. South Africans needed that. And I think it was really, really good for South Africa. But you have to threaten to do it yourself at your own cost when it's right there, prosecutable.
I've got to ask you that, because the Hawks then came out and said that I was spreading fake news when I said that Paul was behind the Trinidadian arrest.
Let's be fair about this. It wasn't the Hawks, was it? It was their spokesman, who himself is a dishonest individual. Him and the truth are very big strangers. This is the man that stood up the day I was arrested and dragged off a plane and lied to the media and said to the media that I had threatened to put him and his family in a body bag. That was an outright lie. This man was dragged from Limpopo. They should drag him back to Limpopo. He was brought from Limpopo by Nklemeza, who we all know was corrupt. He's now on pension. He got a pension. The guy should have got a prison cell. Nklemeza dragged Malaudzi down with him to Pretoria. He's still in Pretoria. I've written to Lebea, to Godfrey, and I've said, the problem you have is you've got a paid liar on your payroll. The guy is spinning yarns. This is the same guy that told the media that Pravin Gordhan would have to face the music. He's the guy that said the SARS 3 would be prosecuted if they didn't answer their questions. Now, how can you run with the foxes and hunt with the hounds, which is exactly what he's done. He was a tool in the arsenal of state capture, and now he's still in his position at DPCI. He's the spokesman for DPCI. He needs to be fired and chased away.
Jeff Goldberg wants to know, so thanks for that. I feel a lot more comfortable now as not being purveyor of fake news. Jeff Goldberg wants to know, do you ever see Jacob Zuma going to jail?
Well, I mean, one has to consider his age. I think he'll have a heart attack and die before he goes to jail. He's not a spring chicken anymore. Now, you know, he's been practicing this, what we call the Stalingrad strategy. He's dragged everything out. He should have gone to jail 10 years. He should have gone to jail 15 years ago. He should have gone to jail at the same time as the guy that was dying of whatever, but survived long enough to be released on compassionate grounds, and playing golf and smoking big fat cigars. And he should have gone to jail at the same time as him. And you had this political interference with the then Scorpions. You know, if we talk about these so-called tapes, these tapes are the tapes that saved Jacob Zuma, because he was going to go down. And then the next thing, the head of the Scorpions was suspended by Mbeki. And why was he suspended? He was suspended because he was planning to arrest Jackie Salebi. You know, if you join the dots here, in fact, I think you'll find it somewhere we've written about it. But Jackie Salebi, they wanted to protect him. But Mbeki wanted to nail Jacob Zuma. Why? Because he wanted Jacob Zuma out of the way so the coast would be clear for him to do a third term as president of the ANC. He wanted to be running the ANC. Of course, the constitution wouldn't allow him to run the country, but he wanted to run the ANC. So in order to do that, he wanted Jacob Zuma out of the way. And the crucial timing for that was the 2006, I think it was, the 2006 conference in Limpopo, Polokwane, the Polokwane conference, the elective conference. So they wanted Zuma out of the way. They wanted him to be charged before the conference. And they wanted Leonard McCarthy and the Scorpions to do that. And of course, they almost went along with it, but they didn't quite get it right. And that led to the disbanding of the Scorpions. And then you had, after Jackie Salebi, after Vusi Pikoli was suspended, Jackie Salebi wanted to make sure he wasn't going to be arrested by the Scorpions. So they tapped the phones of Leonard McCarthy. And in fact, it was the then head of crime intelligence that arranged for that under a specific project relating to false allegations against Carrie Nell. So they tapped all these phones. And the only purpose for tapping the phones was to find out if they were going to arrest Jackie Salebi. But these phone taps became quite useful because while listening to the phones, they heard the conspiracy to nail Jacob Zuma. And during the same period, to get Jackie Salebi off the hook. And they even talked on one of the tapes about bringing in somebody from overseas to deal decisively with the O'Sullivan factor, whatever that should mean. Now, all these tapes magically found their way into Michael Hulley's hands, the same Michael Hulley that appointed Sean Abrahams as head of the NPA. So, you know, you've got this whole criminal syndicate running the National Prosecution Service, the DPCI and government, and headed up by Zuma, Michael Hulley, and their well-connected friends. So between them, they've run this Stalingrad technology. They've worn out and frustrated the criminal justice system. But short answer, do I see him going to jail? I do, if he survives long enough to go there.
Wow. Okay. We have got just dozens of questions, which we're not going to be able to get to because we've already now extended our, well, we'll extend for another 15 minutes, I guess, just to start addressing some of those. But we're already at 1 o'clock. But Sarah Jane Bernard Rose says, you've got a beautiful voice. Why don't you talk more?
I prefer Paul to. I'm not quite trained. I'm very opinionated, don't get me wrong. But I think Paul's sort of more on the ball than I am. I do pipe in if I feel sort of I need to. But thank you very much. That's making me blush.
Piet Cronje.
If there's
Do you remember
Piet Cronje? If there's any Lobola to be paid, I should be considered.
Paul, Piet Cronje says, I met you met Paul, that is, long ago when I was a captain at the SAPS commercial branch in Johannesburg. I think the problem with these prosecutions is that the NPA wants to prosecute the offenders under the POCA Act and add as many accused as possible who are connected to the crime, even if the person only drove the truck. For example, this takes a lot of time to investigate and to prosecute multitudes of accused together in the same trial.
Yeah, I know. I remember you, Pete. All those years ago, my memory's not that bad. I think we worked a few cases together. But you know, at the end of the day, you are right. Now, I ran a few cases which I investigated and were successfully prosecuted. And the cases I think about are like Vito Asante, and I'm talking about fraud cases now. Vito Asante was successfully prosecuted. In regard to Jackie Celebi, he was successfully prosecuted. There was another guy called Andre Bauer. And what we learned along the way was to go for the low-hanging fruit. You know, Celebi was charged, I think, with only 3 offenses. If he'd have been charged with everything he did wrong, that trial would still be going on now. So at the end of the day, you're right, Pete. What they have to do is focus on low-hanging fruit. And if it takes a court action or 2 to get them to do that, really, when you read the act, and I think it was somebody in Shamila's office that mentioned, or maybe it was Hermione Cronje, somebody said it takes 9 years to do a proper corruption investigation. Rubbish, absolute rubbish. A corruption investigation can be done in several months. You adduce sufficient evidence. If we wanted to investigate, for example, Duda Mayani on everything she did wrong, we could spend the next 20 years investigating it. If you want to investigate Radovan Krecher on everything he did wrong, or Antonio Trindade, or Lucky Montana, you could spend 20 years doing an investigation. What we do an investigation, we look for the low-hanging fruit. And once we get that evidence, we ring-fence it, we draft the necessary statements, we get the evidence in a secure fashion so it can't be disputed in court. We put the docket together and we say, here, lock them up. And then nothing happens. So we just need to change the mentality of the National Prosecuting Authority, and the country needs to start calling for it, because our voices are falling on deaf ears. The country needs to be saying, as a collective, prosecute them on 1 charge each, get it done.
If I can also just say the case that we had against Gavin Watson and Vincent Smith, it was a open and close. We didn't go on the investigation on everything that Vincent Smith had done, everything that Gavin Watson had done. We said, right, there was a Twitter release that Vincent Smith did, admitting that he had received a loan from Gavin Watson, admitted it. This is a guy that was head of CETA, giving tenders and that, and then that was on this day at this time. A certain amount of money was paid from this guy to that guy. Here's the bank statements. Boom. Where's the defense? Nothing happened.
And we opened that docket 2 years ago, Alec. Angelo Agrissi came to me in October 2017 to spill the beans. Obviously, he had his own agendas as well. We looked at everything that was placed in front of us. We selected 3, I think there were 2 or 3 very clean, crisp charges. We assembled the docket, we put it together, we gave it to the Hawks. Nothing has been done with it. And there,
You know what happened on the Friday? There was an investigator. Sorry to interrupt. There was an investigating officer on the case, and on one Friday afternoon, I get a call from him, and he says, "Listen, no, he's just been called from head office. He has to go for training in Paarl, and he has to hand over the docket." That Monday, Angelo Agrissi was giving evidence at the Zondo Commission.
Yeah. So what they've done effectively is there's somebody at higher levels protecting all these criminals. That docket, is that docket on our website, Sarah Jane?
I think so.
Yeah. So if you look at that docket,
yeah, there's a photo of Vincent.
Vincent Smith admitted receiving the money from Gavin Watson, and the amount we were talking about was minuscule. But you know what? It was enough of an admission for him to be prosecuted on, and they've done nothing with it. And I don't care if you prosecute somebody for receiving 40,000 rand by way of a bribe. The Act makes it clear you're still liable to a 15-year sentence. They should have prosecuted him on that. We opened that docket 2 years ago. Why hasn't he been prosecuted? He's still in Parliament.
Stan Klope asks, and I guess it's a related question. He says, why were the individuals like Nassif and Agliotti, etc., let off the hook? Same answer.
Well, no. So there was such a keen... Well, first of all, Nassif and Agliotti weren't let off the hook. Everyone says they were let off the hook. They weren't let off the hook. So Agliotti and Nassif were both prosecuted, and they were convicted of drug trafficking. They were sequestrated. All their assets were taken off them. Agliotti became an insolvent. He's probably been rehabilitated by now. But when I say rehabilitated, probably rehabilitated financially, but not mentally, because I think he's still involved in criminal activity. So the two of them were convicted of drug trafficking, which was a case I did, by the way. I did that investigation. I handed it to the Scorpions on the plate. They were both arrested and charged and prosecuted and convicted, and 5 others went to prison. Now, Agliotti was charged with the murder of, what's his name, the mining magnate, Brett Kebble. Now, I knew who'd pulled the trigger the day after he was murdered. But I couldn't tell anybody because we also knew that Jackie Celebi was involved in a cover-up of the case. And Jackie Celebi was on the payroll of Glenn Agliotti and John Stratton, who'd arranged for the murder. Now, that made it very, very complicated. So in order, it was decided, and I wasn't involved in that decision-making process, it was decided by Vusi Pikoli that the biggest fish in the pan to fry was Jackie Celebi because he was the chief of police. And he should be prosecuted. So they granted indemnity to Agliotti and Nassif on the corruption charges if they would testify against Jackie Celebi, which they then did. After that case was finished, and as you know, Celebi was convicted. After that case was finished, they then had to deal with the murder of Brett Kebble. So they charged Glenn Agliotti. And Clinton Nassif became a state witness against Glenn Agliotti. But the problem was the Scorpions by that stage had been disbanded and the DPCI had taken over, and the National Prosecuting Authority by that stage had been infiltrated. And Kherinel was taken off the prosecution of Glenn Agliotti. I have no doubt that if Kherinel had continued and prosecuted Glenn Agliotti would have gone to jail for the murder of Brett Kebble, because he arranged, him and John Stratton arranged and paid Mikey Schultz, what's the other fella, Kappy. Anyway, there were 3 of them that were charged. Now, they were given indemnity as well, the people that murdered Brett Kebble, to testify against Glenn Agliotti. But unfortunately, the prosecution was a mess. It wasn't properly done. And of course, the rest is history. Agliotti quite literally got away with murder, and so did the people that killed Brett Kebble.
Well, we've come to the end of the program, but I'm just going to add a few little things. We've literally got 4 minutes to go, and we've already overstayed our welcome by 15 minutes. Johan van Lochrenberg sent back a comment to say Agliotti was actually sequestrated by SARS for tax evasion of 75 million rand. Yeah. SARS further registered a tax fraud case with the NPA soon after the Celebi trial. The docket has been gathering dust ever since. You should work with Johan. We then had somebody else asks, Chinsbana asks, can Outer not combine with Paul's company? Can you not combine with Outer? Quick question, yes or no?
Well, Forensics for Justice, we're independent. We self-contained, so to speak. We don't have thousands of members that pay a subscription, unfortunately. And Outer focuses on things like avoiding payment of your toll gantries and stuff like that. All my cars have got the e-toll tags in, so I don't think we would fit in at Outer. I would love to have access to the cash they have, but I don't think it will ever happen because they get millions of rand a month in subscriptions. We get 0 rand a month. I think we get 300 rand or 400 rand a month in subscriptions. They get millions. So it would be nice to get something like that going, but at the moment, I like to keep it simple and keep it small. They've got a big corporation with offices and lots of employees and whatnot, so they've become more of a corporate entity than we are. And really, at the end of the day, what we like to do is put people behind bars rather than avoid paying e-toll and stuff like that. I mean, look, they've exposed Dudu Mayeni quite nicely, but I'm not sure of the validity or the value of having Dudu Mayeni declared a delinquent director, because in any event, who else would hire her as a director of any company anyway? But they've done a good job in exposing some of her wrongdoings, and I think we should laud them for that. But you know,
Well,
we like to be lean and.
I was at school with Wayne Duvenage, and I think the two of you would make an incredible team. He's always been just as hard-assed as you are, and he's always been out there asking questions and the right questions. So anyway, there's just a little bone to throw. We're closing up now, but the last question, and I do apologize to all the members of the BizNews community, and there are just so dozens of questions here that we had never got to. But we're going to close up by one that from Rob Suter, who says, Paul, in your opinion, is all the corruption currently in the public domain just a tip of a very big iceberg?
Well, I suppose, certainly from our point of view, yes, because the cases we've investigated and put together, we are inundated. So we have a hotline. I think it's 0800 118 118, and we also have a on our website you can supply information there. We get 5 to 10 emails a week about corruption, and unfortunately we don't have the resources to investigate them. So what we do is we work out who best to send the email to, and we forward it. But yeah, I guess it is like an iceberg. You know, corruption doesn't leave an audit trail. Like, for example, if you've got a crime like bank robbery, you know, you've got the safe blown open and the cash is gone. It's very clear to see what happened. Corruption is not that clear to see what happened. You've got big business out there involved in corruption, and they're involved in corruption. When you tackle them on it, they say, well, we had no choice. And I say, well, what do you mean you had no choice? They said, well, if we didn't pay the bribes, we wouldn't get the contracts. Now, we need to change the culture in South Africa, and we need to change the systems. I'm in London at the moment. I came up a couple of weeks ago, and I'm working on a project here. Now, all the government contracts here are tendered by e-tender. You cannot influence a tender in any way, shape, or form. You have to pre-qualify. If you pre-qualify, the actual tender itself is an electronic bidding process. And they have, it's like you enter your bid online. You have no ability to influence the outcome of that tender. We need to start doing that in South Africa. The problem is, of course, the company that would do it would probably want, you know, they would be forced to pay a bribe to get the contract.
Yes. Exactly.
No, Paul, come on. Give us a little bit of an upbeat ending to this webinar. I know that you love South Africa. You're still fighting the good fight despite all the odds. We really are. We're getting so many frustrated people who are telling us the country's finished and the 500 billion is stolen. And
let's set the record straight. Okay, I mentioned it earlier. I'm a property man. Okay, and Sarah Jane knows about some of my property deals. In November last year, I bought 15 million rand into South Africa to buy property. Now, why would I be doing that if I thought the country didn't have a future? So I'm satisfied that South Africa, of course, if I'd have known COVID was coming along, I probably wouldn't have bought the property in question. But, you know, the big issue is South Africa is very investable. It's a great country. The culture in South Africa you cannot find anywhere else in the world. They're the friendliest people in the world. Black, white, Indian. I have lots of friends across the cultural divide, and you know, I can't imagine myself wanting to be, and I've got an Irish passport, British passport, Australian passport, South African passport. I wouldn't live anywhere else other than South Africa. So what do you do if a country's broken? We get stuck in and we fix it, and that's what we're going to do. We'll fix South Africa, and if we just got to keep shouting and screaming and getting arrested and dragged off planes in order to fix it, we'll do what we have to do. But I made it clear I will not give in. While there's breath in my lungs, I will carry on, and South Africa will be where it should be already. It should be one of the best countries in the world.
Sarah Jane, you've also spent time behind bars, not of your own making, also with these criminals. What does Paul call them? Criminals with badges, or crooks with badges.
Yeah, I wanted when they locked her up, I wanted to oppose bail.
Hilarious. That joke never gets old. Kidding. Yeah, look, I mean, it was traumatizing, but I've sort of got my head around it, and I'm itching to do some private prosecutions. Itching. Paul and I are ready to go quickly, and I think that will also put some sort of hope and positivity into the future of the country, that things are being done. The state's not doing anything, so why don't we do it? We can. So why don't we do it? Start showing the state how to do their job.
Yeah, let's be fair about it, Alec. Sarah Jane is very brave. What she went through, most ladies wouldn't have to go through, and she comes from a
most men wouldn't.
She comes from a proper background, you know. She's not from fish and chip country. She comes from a proper background with proper upbringing, and what she went through was shocking. I want to make those people pay for it. We can prosecute those people, and we will do.
Paul O'Sullivan, Sarah Jane Trent, we've had many people putting through comments as well to say thank you very much for the webinar. I hope that this time, when we send out the request, that you get more than 300,000 Rand from the BizNews community. I know that they invest heavily in other good or intentional projects. I know that the two of you are also doing your bit in the whole COVID-19 story. You don't talk about it, but I do see Paul's emails from time to time excited about the food that you're giving to local communities and things like that. So you really are national assets, national treasures, and it has been a real privilege to have you on our Thursday noontime webinar today, and more strength to Forensics for Justice, and look forward to being back with you on this webinar again in the near future. Stuart, before we close off, will people be able to access recordings, etc.?
Thanks, Alec, and thanks, Paul and Sarah, for your time as well. Yes, Alec, we'll get the video loaded as soon as possible. Obviously, it takes a bit of processing, and then we'll put it onto the YouTube channel, the BizNews YouTube channel, so people have access to post and can send it on to their friends as well. So that's all good. And thanks again.
Good, thank you very much.
All the very best, and enjoy the rest of the week.
Peace out.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye then.